Hey everyone, time to review AFL round 7 of the 2025 season. Round 7 was a great round. We had 8 bets, all of them won, so perfect 8-0 on the round. Now 40-22 on the season. If you want to see everything I'm betting plus additional previews, all that information is in the link in the description. But going really well so far this season through the first 7 rounds. In round number 7, what we're going to look at in this video is these games from a betting and statistical perspective. So we're going to look at who covered the spread, did these games go over or under, and what the market was doing. Was the market right or wrong in the way that it moved during the week on these games? And then we're also going to look at what contributed to teams winning or teams losing games. So overall, looking at the round, 6 of the 9 games went over the total points of betting line. That's based off the closing line for the game. Now on the season, 32 games have gone over, 30 games have gone under. Home teams this week won 7 of the 9 games. There are only 2 road teams to win. Brisbane Lions beating St Kilda, and then the Western Bulldogs beating GWS in Sydney. Away teams covered the spread though in 5 of the 9 games. Overall in the season, home teams are 33-29 against the spread. And then favourites won 7 of the 9 games outright. The Western Bulldogs beating GWS, and then on Sunday, Carlton beating Geelong were the only 2 underdogs to win outright. Underdogs, though, covered 5 of the 9 games, and it came down to the Hawthorn West Coast Eagles game as to whether favourites or underdogs were going to have a winning round against the spread. With West Coast covering that game, it meant the underdogs got the 5 of the 9 games. Overall in the season, though, favourites are 32-30 against the spread. Looking at the first game, so we're going to go through game by game, and we're going to go through some trends as well from these matches. First game on Thursday night, Melbourne versus Richmond. Melbourne won by 20 points. Melbourne opened $1.33, stayed at that price. The game went under 171.5, and the market got it right, moving down from 176.5 throughout the week. Melbourne still have only covered 1 of their 7 games, and 3 of their last 4 games have gone under the total points line. Richmond have now covered 3 of their last 4 games, and their last 3 games have gone under the total. Looking at how this matchup played out, the first half was fairly even. You can see Melbourne led by 5 points at quarter time, 3 goals to 2 in the first quarter. 2 goals each in the second term. Melbourne went into the break leading by 4 points, and at that point it was anyone's game. Also, Richmond were coming off the win the week prior against Gold Coast, so you had to give them some hope at halftime that they were still in the game. But Melbourne, for the most part, dominated the second half. They kicked 7 goals to 5 overall, but they really built this big 40-plus point lead midway through the fourth quarter. Richmond kicked the last 4 goals of the game, which brought it back to that 20-point margin. Looking at the stats from this matchup, Melbourne had a majority of the ball, almost an extra 100 disposals on the game. Slightly more inside 50s. Both teams had a low inside 50 count for this matchup. The Demons won the free kick count 26-19 and were the more efficient side going inside 50. Clearances were exactly even, 38 apiece, and same with center clearances and stoppages. But Melbourne won the contested possession and plenty more uncontested possessions. Turnovers, Melbourne had 60, Richmond had 69. Melbourne, though, had 50 points from turnovers compared to Richmond just gaining 28 points from Melbourne, 60 turnovers. This is the big one, marked 126-94. Overall, Melbourne had 23 scoring shots to 18, which kind of contributed to their 20-point margin in the end. Once again, Richmond only the 42 tackles. It's an area they definitely need to lift, putting pressure on the opponent, especially when they are inside 50 to try and lock that ball in. That'll help them make more use of the inside 50 opportunities that they generate. For Melbourne, good overall performance, made it back-to-back wins after winning last week as well. This week, they go over to Perth to play West Coast, but they do get 9 days rest going into that matchup, and West Coast will be on the shorter turnaround, having played the Sunday game this week. And then Richmond, they have a decent 10-day break as well before they'll play Hawthorn on Sunday, where they're going to be big outsiders, but Hawthorn will also, similar to West Coast, as they played the last game of the round in round 7, they're going to be on a shorter turnaround going into that matchup. Next match we'll look at on Friday afternoon, Collingwood ran out 41-point winners over Essendon, 107-66, 27 scoring shots to 16. For this matchup, Collingwood won and covered the spread. They're $1.38 into $1.25. The game went over 155.5, and that number moved right down from 168.5 early in the week, down to 155.5. Even if it had stayed at that 168.5 number, still would have gone over the total. For this matchup, Collingwood controlled majority of the first half, leading 22-7 at quarter time, 3 goals to 1. Second term, they kicked 3 goals to 4. That was a bit more even. And you can see Essendon had this little run here, 4 straight goals midway through the second term, which brought it back down to a 1-score game. And then, especially in the third term, Essendon kicked the first 2 goals to put themselves in front. So they had this nice little run from midway through the second term to early in the third, where they kicked 6 of 7 goals in that span. But for the majority of the second half, Collingwood ran away with it. Overall, in the second half, they kicked 10 goals to 5, and they also kicked 8 of the last 11 goals for the game. This was the 6th straight win for Collingwood, the 4th game in a row that they've covered the spread, and they've covered all games since their bye in round number 3. Essendon now, with not covering this game, are now 2-4 against the spread overall on the season. Still side and bottom was your Anzac Day medal winner, 35 disposals in this game, 15 clearances, all really good numbers. Josh Dacos had the most disposals at 36. Looking at the stats for this game, Collingwood slightly more disposals, but definitely controlled the inside 50s, 59-43, and were more efficient going inside 50. So when you add in the more opportunities and the better efficiency, it's clear why they won this game by 40 plus points. Controlled the stoppage clearances, 32-21. Collingwood had 44 points from stoppages compared to Essendon having 31. From turnovers, even though they are very even, Collingwood had 57 points from turnovers compared to Essendon just having 32 points. Both sides were very accurate in front of goal. Collingwood 16 goals 11, and then Essendon 10 goals 6 are both really good numbers, but 16 to 8 marks inside 50, definitely a key indicator which helped get Collingwood those extra shots at goal. Really good overall performance from Collingwood. Like, the game was still in the balance around halftime, early in the third, but they kicked away and just showed they were the strongest side during that second half to get over the line. Collingwood, after this, will be facing Geelong on Saturday night, who are coming off the loss against Carlton. That shapes up to be a good game. Collingwood will go in as favourites. And then Essendon, they're on a 6-day turnaround, and they'll be playing North Melbourne on Thursday night this week, who'll be desperate for a win. Later game on Friday, Fremantle beat the Adelaide Crows at home by 18 points, 85-67. Both these sides were inaccurate. Fremantle had the 25 scoring shots to 22 for the Crows. Fremantle won and covered. They were $1.78 into $1.72, and the game went under, and the market got it right, moving from 178.5 down to 177.5. This matchup, Fremantle led the entire time, and it never really looked in that much danger of losing the game. They held around a 20 to 30 point margin for the most part of the game. Adelaide did kick 4 goals to none in the 4th term to definitely bridge the margin back. But by that point, like when you're going into the 4th quarter trailing by over 40 points, it's a long way back from there. And pretty much, if you don't make the most of all your opportunities, or the other team kicks 1 or 2 goals, the game's over. So everything in that 4th term needed to have gone right for Adelaide to win this game. Fremantle have now covered 4 of their last 5 games, and Adelaide, after starting the season really well, have lost 3 of their last 4 games. 3 of their last 4 have also gone under after starting the season with 3 straight games going over the total. Looking at the stats for this game, Fremantle had slightly more of the ball, definitely more handball heavy. Inside 50s, 53-42. Adelaide were more efficient in terms of going inside 50 with those less opportunities, only a few less scoring shots. Potentially being slightly more accurate definitely would have made a difference and made this game a lot closer than it ended up being. Fremantle won the clearances, 38-30 overall, both at the centre and also at the stoppages. Turnovers, low numbers for both sides, only 54-50. Coming back up to the clearances though, as you can see, Fremantle had more clearances overall, but the other problem with this is Adelaide kicked 1 goal, 8 behinds, 14 total points from stoppages, whereas Fremantle kicked 5 goals, 3-33 from stoppages, and the game margin was 18 points. There was a 19-point difference between the two of those. That's the key area where Adelaide needed to make more use of those opportunities from the stoppages. Like 1 goal, 8 from 9 scoring shots is just not enough in what ended up being a close game. So this one really could have gone either way. It just came down to Adelaide's conversion in front of goal. Fremantle following this back in Melbourne this week. They'll be playing on Friday night against Collingwood. And then Adelaide, they have a tough 3 weeks coming up. They have Carlton, Port Adelaide, and Collingwood in their next 3 games. At least they'll play their first 2 of those at home. So that shapes up well, but all 3 of those games are a challenge, and especially when they're coming into this, losing 3 of their last 4 and 3 tough games coming up. Adelaide's season is going to be shaped over the next 3 weeks. If they need to definitely win at least 1 of those games, ideally 2, to leave themselves in a better position going forward. Brisbane got back on the winners list, 45-point winners over St Kilda, 118 to 73. They had 33 scoring shots to 18 overall. Brisbane led the entirety of this game. St Kilda were never in front. Quarter time, it was an 18-point margin to the Lions. They extended on that into the halftime break out to 34 points. There was a little bit of a fight back in the third term. St Kilda kicking the first 3 goals of that quarter. They got the margin back to under 20 points, but then Brisbane fired away throughout the fourth term. Throughout the second half, they kicked 9 goals to 8 in favour, but a lot of that damage was done during this period, which pushed the margin right out. A couple of late goals to St Kilda, the final 2 goals of the game, brought the margin back under 50 points. Brisbane won, covered the spread. They're $1.50 into $1.45, and the game went over the 180.5, but there was no movement. 3 straight losses now for St Kilda. They've also failed to cover all 3 of those games. This season, St Kilda are 6-1 to the over. Brisbane Lions moved to 6-1 win-loss on the season. They've scored exactly 118 points in 3 of their last 4 games, which is interesting and a bit of a weird stat. That's also helped 3 of those 4 games, like the games where they've kicked 118, all 3 of those games have gone over the total, largely thanks to that. Stats for this game: high disposal game, both sides closing in on the 400 mark, Lions with 410, St Kilda just shy of 388. Really high kick numbers as well. Brisbane Lions 66 to 43 inside 50s, so plus 23, really high numbers. They're also significantly more efficient when going inside 50, 59% compared to 39%. Here we're looking at the other heavily advantageous stat in favour of the Lions, 52 to 34, especially at the stoppages, 37 to 22. So Brisbane overall dominated the stoppages. They scored 67 to 26 from stoppages. And overall in this game, like, Brisbane weren't really that accurate. 17 goals, 16. Had they been more accurate, they could have scored more than the 118 points they got in this game. Turnovers very even. Possessions and contested possessions both fairly even as well. Brisbane with the slightly more marks and plus 11 in marks inside 50. After this game, St Kilda will be at Marvel again this week. They'll be playing Fremantle on Friday. And for the Brisbane Lions, they have a huge game against the Gold Coast Suns. That'll be on Sunday this weekend. And it's probably like the biggest game between the 2 sides. Aside from like their first ever meeting, this matchup is the one where both sides are playing the best that they have out of any time that they've faced each other. That sets up to be a really good game on this weekend for round number 8. Port Adelaide beat North Melbourne by 9 points, and this was a game that was very close. Good fight back from North Melbourne after being down close to 30 points. Port Adelaide won the game, but North Melbourne covered. Port were $1.17 into $1.11 throughout the week. The game went over the total, but the market moved it down from 184.5 down to 183.5. This was now 3 straight wins for Port Adelaide. 5th straight loss for North Melbourne, but they finally kept an opponent under 100 points. They just did it, just with the 97 there for Port Adelaide. And this was their first covering of the spread in a game since their win over Melbourne back in round number 2. Also this season, North Melbourne are 6-1 to the over when you're looking at total points betting. Port Adelaide got away in the first quarter. They kicked 45 points, and nearly half their score came in that first term, kicking 7 goals, 3. They led by 29 points at the first break. Going into halftime and in that second quarter, North Melbourne won that quarter. They kicked 5 goals to 2, bridged the margin back to 12 points at halftime, so we were well and truly in the game at that stage. Similar story in the third term, both sides kicking 3 goals. And Port Adelaide never really got away in this game. North Melbourne kept bridging the margin back. North Melbourne also won the fourth term, 3 goals to 2, but just couldn't quite get themselves over the line to win the game. But definitely an improved performance on their past few weeks, that's for sure. This matchup, North Melbourne had the majority of the ball, 339 to 325, but it was played down Port Adelaide's end, plus 7 in inside 50s. North was slightly more efficient going inside 50. In terms of clearances, extremely even in that stat. And there's one thing I noticed for this game, there's very little between the 2 sides. And just that couple of points difference just could have really gone either way. 15 to 11 marks inside 50. Port had the more scoring shots, 27 to 23. So that was probably the thing that got them over the line in the end in this game. Port have some good tests coming up over the next month. They'll play the Western Bulldogs. That game will be played in Ballarat this weekend. Then they're followed by Adelaide, Geelong, and Fremantle. This next month, Port coming through into 3 wins will definitely give us a really good indicator on where they're at. For North Melbourne, they're having a Thursday night game, which is their only Thursday night game on the fixture as it currently ends. Obviously, the final third of the season hasn't been released yet. Currently, this is their only Thursday night game, and it'll be against Essendon this weekend for another side who will be keen for a win coming off the loss against Collingwood on Friday. When going through these stats, I just wanted to give a real bird's eye view of the game in the AFL Bet Finders, which you can access through the description. That's where you have way more in-depth stats on the scoring and the efficiency, both in attack and defense of these sides, which give you a more complete picture of their overall performances and overall on the season. So definitely check that out if you haven't used the Bet Finders before and you want to make money betting on the AFL specifically. Like, that's a huge part of how I go through and choose the bets, like seeing where these teams' strengths and weaknesses are and how teams can capitalize on that. And you can also use it for disposal markets as well. It works really good for that. Like, the statistics and the bet finders are the reason why I've been able to make a full-time income betting on sports for over a decade. So definitely recommend having a look if you're serious about making money betting on sports. Then on Saturday night, Western Bulldogs 113 to 81, 28 scoring shots to 21. Over the GWS Giants on the road. The Bulldogs won and covered. They were $2.60 into $2.55, and the game went over 164.5, which moved down significantly from 173.5 throughout the week. So once again, the total movement was wrong on this matchup. Game was even early on. Going into halftime was just a 5-point margin with Western Bulldogs kicking this goal through Tim English right on the halftime break. That put them in front, but throughout that first half, it was just 10 points either way right throughout that term, and it was very even. But it was in the second half that the Western Bulldogs really kicked away. They kicked 9 goals to 5 in the entire second half. It was through this period here where they got on this run, kicking 6 straight goals in a row throughout that second term. It was this period right here. They kicked 5 straight goals in the third quarter, plus when you add in that one right before, and also got the first goal of the fourth term. So total of 7 straight goals during that little period. That was the run of momentum that the Giants couldn't stop, and ultimately they couldn't peg back in the end. 32-point margin in the end for the Bulldogs. This is now back-to-back losses for GWS, and also the most points they've conceded this season. 3 of their last 4 games have now gone over the total. For the Bulldogs, back-to-back wins. They're now 4-3 on the season, which is very good considering the personnel they have missed throughout this opening third of the season. Their last 4 games have also gone over the total points line. The stats for this game, GWS had almost 400 disposals, but it wasn't enough, and they only managed 45 inside 50s from almost 400 disposals. So way too much overuse of the ball in terms of going inside 50. Their efficiency once they did go in was good at 64%. However, to have that much ball and only 45 entries, it's not quite good enough. Bulldogs plus 15 at the 60, but also in their own right weren't super efficient, but still had 28 scoring shots in the end. So still pretty good numbers considering just having a lot of entries. For this game, clearances dominated by the Bulldogs, 55 to 33, which is definitely surprising considering the quality of the GWS midfield. The Bulldogs had 55 points from stoppages and GWS only the 30 points. And then at turnovers, 55 to 63. So the Bulldogs had more turnovers. However, GWS only managed 38 points from those 63 turnovers, where the Bulldogs got 57 points from the 55 GWS turnovers in this game. Marks heavily favouring GWS, so they were controlling the ball, just weren't going forward with it. Positive signs there for the Bulldogs defence overall. Big game coming up for GWS this weekend, definitely an important one, and they probably catch the Swans at a good time. That'll be on Sunday afternoon. After back losses are definitely important. They win that game. And as mentioned earlier, against Port Adelaide, the Bulldogs will be in Ballarat this week. Then first game on Sunday, Gold Coast running out big winners, 38 points over the Sydney Swans. 32 scoring shots, 117 to just the 19 scoring shots and 79 points for the Sydney Swans. Gold Coast won and covered the spread. They're $1.52 into $1.42, and the game went over 175.5 with no market movement. Gold Coast really bounced back from that loss against Richmond last week with a big win here, 5-1 on the season, and they've started favourite in every game so far. This was the third straight loss for the Swans and have failed to cover the spread in all three of those games. Also, they were an underdog in this game as well. So when you can obviously lose games, but if you're covering the spread, that's a good sign. But not only losing games, but also not covering the spread is definitely concerning. The timeline for this matchup is very interesting. Swans dominated the first term. They led 39-14, so a 25-point margin at quarter time, kicking 6 goals to 2 in that term. Second quarter, they kicked 3 goals to 4, so Gold Coast bridged the margin back at halftime. Only were trailing by 17 points at that point, but it was right here midway through the second quarter that this onslaught from Gold Coast started, which led all the way through into the fourth quarter. In the third quarter, Gold Coast kicked 6 goals, 6, so 12 scoring shots to just 1 behind. This was the period where Swans just couldn't get anything going, and Gold Coast were absolutely controlling the game. A big run, and that was this period of the game that got them the win. Final term, 5 goals to 3. Once again, Gold Coast won that fourth quarter, extended their margin a little bit more out to that 38 points to end the game. They had a similar number of inside 50s for this game. There wasn't a great deal between them. Gold Coast were just +4 in inside 50s, but had 32 scoring shots to 19. So in terms of efficiency going inside and not just kicking goals, but also getting scoring shots, there was a huge difference from them there. Gold Coast also weren't super accurate. Swans were the more accurate side of the two. So Gold Coast could have won this game by more. They were 9 goals, 10-64 from turnovers. We come down and have a look at the turnovers. 65 there for Sydney, but kicking 9 goals, 10, there was definitely room that they could have turned 10 of those behinds into 2, 3, maybe even 4 goals and really push this margin out over 50 points. From stoppages, where Gold Coast won the stoppages 39-30, but 25-17 at the actual stoppages in play. It was 41-26 in terms of scores from stoppages. Marks favoured the Swans. Inside 50 though were 13-9 in favour of Gold Coast tackles. Fairly right on even at 51 each. Gold Coast, as mentioned, have their massive game against the Brisbane Lions on Sunday. They'll give themselves a huge chance of winning that game. Sydney also have a rivalry game playing the GWS Giants this week. At this point, I'd betted every single game of the round so far, but this was the one game I decided just to leave out of my official bets, as I had a real feeling Carlton would win this game, especially the way Geelong beat Hawthorn the week prior. I just assumed this was going to be a letdown spot for Geelong. Should have trusted that, but just elected to stay out altogether and not get involved. But Carlton won by 18 points, 94-76. Geelong just the 16 scoring shots, so thankfully for them, they were at least accurate, which kept them in the game. Carlton won, covered the spread as underdogs here, 260 into 230, and the game went under 173.5, which had also moved down from 174.5 throughout the week. But it was fairly close with the 170 points being scored in this game. So 1 goal could have pushed it over the number. So the total here was pretty much spot on. Carlton lost 4 straight to start the season. They've now won 3 straight. This was definitely the best of them. Beating North Melbourne and West Coast, can't get too carried away with that. But beating Geelong, who are playing well, definitely show signs they're back on track. They've also covered each of their last 3 games. So in all those wins, they've covered the spread. 5 of their 6 games have gone under the total. Geelong have won their last 2 games as underdogs, but then lost here as a favourite. So going forward, maybe a slightly tricky team to trust if they're going into games as favourites based off of that. And you want to look for them when they're more value. The timeline for this game, Carlton led at all 4 breaks, so by 1 point at quarter time. They extended on that to lead by 19 at half time. Extended on it again to lead by 28 at 3/4 time. Geelong won the fourth quarter, 4 goals to 2. It got the margin back to 3 goals, but were never really in a huge chance of winning. I guess maybe at this stage here, when they kicked 3 goals in a row, Bailey Smith goal, they got the margin back to 10 points, but Harry Mackay got the next goal, which pushed it back out to a 3-goal margin halfway through the fourth quarter. And Geelong weren't just quite able to get there, just not getting enough scoring chances. In terms of inside 50s, it was all played down. Carlton's end, plus 19. They weren't efficient going forward, but they had enough opportunities to kick a winning score. That was the difference. 20-11 in terms of free kicks, so nearly double there for Carlton. Stoppage clearances were controlled by the Blues, 30-23. And then turnovers, this was the big one for this game. Geelong made 73 turnovers, so well up on their average, and Carlton made them pay. They kicked 67 points from those 73 turnovers, and even though Carlton had 67 turnovers, Geelong only scored 21 points from those 67 turnovers. So didn't capitalize at all, and with those 16 scoring shots, and they're lucky like they were even in the contest considering the limited number of scoring shots and also inside 50s that they had in this game. 117 to 69 marks, huge numbers there in favor of Carlton. And looking at the tackles, Carlton also defensively made more tackles even though they had the majority of the ball. Looking forward, Carlton, they're over to Adelaide this week to face the Crows. They'll be on a 6-day turnaround going into that game. Adelaide will have the rest advantage, and that'll be a 2-day rest advantage in favour of the Crows. Geelong, they have a tough matchup against Collingwood on Saturday night, and that'll be their third game in a row at the MCG. Final game of the round, Hawthorn beat the West Coast Eagles by 50 points, 34 scoring shots to 19. 124 to 74. Hawthorn won, but West Coast covered the spread. Hawks were $1.02 out to $1.03 for this game. A little bit of movement, not a great deal at those kind of odds. The game went over 178.5 and moved down from 180.5. So the market got it wrong in both sides on this game. Hawthorn led for the entirety of the game. First quarter was fairly close, just a 7-point lead at that main break, but in the second term they really kicked away 7 goals to 2. And that was where they really built their margin for the game. They led by 35 at halftime, 37 at three-quarter time, and then pushed it out with a few late goals in particular to push it out to the 50-point margin. They kicked 6 goals to 4 in the final term, so a 10-goal final quarter to end the game. For Hawthorn, as I said, this was their highest score of the season, but they've failed to cover the spread in each of their last 3 games since their bye. After they covered all 4 games to start the season. Obviously, they did lose 2 of those games as favourite and then just couldn't quite cover. They went very close. The spread was about 56 for this game from memory. So nearly did cover, but it's not quite. West Coast is still yet to win a game this season. They're 0-7, but however, they have covered the spread in their last 2 games against Hawthorn and against Essendon. Hawks had majority of the ball here, almost 400 disposals, but we're only +6 in terms of inside 50s, but we're extremely efficient kicking. 18 goals, 34 scoring shots from those 56 entries. Big numbers. West Coast defensively, that's a huge issue. Hawks won the free kicks 24-11, so sizable advantage there. They also won the clearances +9, +6 at the stoppages, and at the turnovers, 71 turnovers for the Eagles. Hawks had 77 points from turnovers, West Coast only the 41. And the key thing for this game is obviously the efficiency in terms of going inside 50. All those scoring shots for Hawthorn from a similar number of entries is just enough to get you over the line and win comfortably. 23 marks inside 50. This is the huge area of concern for West Coast every single week. Just giving up easy marks and scoring shots to the opposition. Hawthorn, they have another straightforward game this week against Richmond, which will be on Sunday. It's not necessarily a quick turnaround for Hawthorn because there will be 7 days rest going into that game. However, Richmond will have a 3-day rest advantage having played Thursday night, and they'll have a 10-day rest going into that game. So that gives Richmond a bit of an advantage. For West Coast, they're back in Perth to play Melbourne. They'll be on the Saturday, so it'll be a 6-day turnaround. But similar to Hawthorn, they'll be on a 3-day rest disadvantage as Melbourne played on the Thursday game going into round number 7. So that's my look at each of the games on the weekend. Looking at the ladder, Collingwood and Brisbane sit in 1 and 2 spots, both 6-1 on the season. Game clear of Hawthorn and Gold Coast on 5 wins and 1 or 2 losses. Gold Coast ahead with that 150% percentage. Then you have a bit of a logjam here with 6 teams on 4 wins and 16 points going from Adelaide all the way down to Port Adelaide. Those sides will definitely sort themselves out a bit in the next couple of weeks. And then Carlton, Essendon, and Kilda all on 3 wins. A couple of Swans, probably the most surprising side, down just on the 2 wins so far. And a tough game for them coming up against GWS this week, who sit up there in 6th spot, looking to cement their spot inside the top 8. Coming up this week, I'll be doing a preview for round number 8. We're going to go through all the betting trends for the games coming up. I'll go through what I'm considering betting, so stay tuned for that video. If you want to get access to everything I'm betting, remember we're coming off a perfect round last week. I want to continue it. Overall, the season's been very, very good in the AFL so far. The link to the AFL Best Bets membership is in the description. All you have to do is create an account and you get access to all my bets and also all the bet find tools in your membership, so you can analyze everything to do with these teams, their scoring, their attacking and defensive abilities, and also go through player props, so for disposals and goal scorers. So definitely check it out. Really appreciate you guys watching and following along on the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.